Town Plan and Zoning Commission public hearing and regular meeting of Wednesday, June 14th to order. First order of business is please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Have the secretary read the roll.
Chairman Aida.
Here.
Commissioner Camillo.
Here.
Commissioner Claffey.
Here.
Commissioner Minor. Commissioner Payne. Here. Commissioner Sarah.
Here.
Commissioner Sobieski.
Here.
Commissioner Batalica. Commissioner Tannengrave. Commissioner Fox.
We will have Commissioner Fox sit for Commissioner Minor. Next item is the approval of the agenda. I'll turn it to the planner.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I recommend adding a new item under new business. Item C, informal site plan presentation by Chick-fil-A for 3240 Berlin Turnpike.
Anyone have any questions or concerns about adding that to the agenda? Seeing none, then we'll put it on for item C under new business.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is public participation. Anyone from the public wishing to speak to the commission on any subject, please come forward, state your name and address for the record. Anyone from the public wishing to address the commission? Okay, seeing none, we'll go into the next item, which is zoning enforcement officer's report. Discuss zoning enforcement procedure with the town attorney. I'm going to ask our town attorney to come forward and join us at the table. And over to the zoning enforcement officer.
Okay, I guess quickly before we get to the town attorney, if anybody has any questions, you should have got the report in the package from May, so we can go through that quickly before we get to the next item. If anybody has any questions or other things that they'd like to talk about.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you can hear me. Is this thing working? Hello?
There you go.
That's better now? All right. Thank you for having me here tonight, commissioners.
Just a second. Does anyone have any questions on the zoning enforcement officer's report? Any additions or have any items you want to talk about that's not on the report or you have concerns?
The stuff I sent you,
Yeah, that was after
yeah,
May.
so it'll be out. Okay.
So it'll be on the June.
I see one of them on there though.
That'll show up. Those come in.
Hartford Ave sign.
Yeah. So those will be on.
Okay,
That'll be on
gotcha.
for next meeting.
Anyone else? Dominic?
Yeah. Could you explain the process you do for the zoning enforcement to try to, because it appears that there's, even though we have a moratorium, there's still a lot of violations out there throughout the entire town. So I was wondering if you could explain to the commission your process on zoning enforcement.
For temporary signs or for? Predominantly, we receive complaints through people walking in, or if they call in, or if we, get stuff through the website, and then we'll go out and take a look at it. And if there's a violation, then we'll move forward with, typically a notice of zoning violation. For the signs in particular, we've been focusing that a little more strongly just because of the moratorium. So if it's obviously in the right-of-way, as we've discussed, we typically will take them without any type of notice ahead of time. And then depending on where the property stands in enforcement, if they've been notified about it in the past, we might go directly to a citation and deal with it that way. Or if I know the business, I'll try to give them a call just to expedite having it removed. It's kind of a case by case.
So it sounds like you pretty much only act upon complaints, or if you happen to be out there, you're not deliberately going out and driving the town so many times a week, or?
If we see, obviously if I'm going out to a property to look at something that has come up you know, as a complaint and we see something else that's going on, that's an issue, you know, then we don't just turn on the blinders, no. But,
But you don't have a dedicated time that you drive around, let's say, twice a week and hit the whole town, as a one process. Is that correct?
that's correct, we don't have, no.
Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioner questions for the zoning enforcement officer? Go ahead, Stanley.
Mike, I don't know if you saw Channel 3 the other day or not. There was a big expose on chickens. I guess there's some type of disease or something you can get. And they're recommending young kids do not get near them. I suggest maybe give the state health department a call and follow up on that. They strongly suggest you don't put them in your house. I just happened to catch the tail end of it. It was on Channel 3 the other day, about a week ago.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to the health department here to see if they're doing anything with that.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner questions or remarks for the zoning enforcement officer? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Ben. I'm sorry, Ben.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone, commissioners, Mr. Town Planner, CEO. I'm here to address any issues and concerns on the proposed changes regarding the enforcement procedures regarding violations of our zoning regulations. As you know, it was this commission that initiated their desire to make it a little bit easier for our zoning enforcement officer to deal with violations in town and the process by which he uses to issue citations and warnings and et cetera. Coincidentally, the town council is also addressing the same issue because I thought it'd be logical to have them address the blight ordinance because it's the same person dealing with both issues. So there is a draft regulation change that I hope you guys have. And, oh, they don't have it yet. Okay. Okay. All right, well, I shouldn't have assumed that you had that. And I can certainly disseminate that to everyone. But maybe the town planner might have some concerns after having looked at it. And maybe you could address some of the concerns of the commission.
Before you distribute it to the commission.
Right, yeah.
Good idea.
And the idea behind it is to allow the zoning enforcement officer and the blight enforcement officer to go to a particular property, and instead of, well, he would assess the situation, but instead of going back to his office and issuing a warning letter with a 72-hour waiting period and so forth, and having it delivered by a marshal or by mail, he would be able to have a ticket book, just like a police officer. And you're on the scene, and the ticket book would have maybe a box for a warning, maybe the box for a citation, and it would be able to describe what the violations were and the time period to correct them and whatever other necessary items would be there regarding due process. And I thought that using the ticket book, this actually goes back quite a few years. It's been on the table for quite some time until you guys initiated it again, would be extremely efficient. And I think if we make a couple minor changes to our regs, we could certainly get this done.
So it does not have to be approved by the council. It could all be done here at the zoning.
Well, you're an autonomous body, so yeah. I mean, that would be a regulation right here. And you would put your legislative hat on.
Mr. Planner, if you have some concerns or some items that maybe it's a good time now to bring them up.
Well, let's talk about, would that process be any quicker than the current citation process where a letter is mailed to the accused?
My opinion is it would be extremely efficient. I mean, he's going out to a property, he's assessing the situation, and Mr. D'Amato, you can correct me if my interpretation is incorrect. Then you have to go back to your office, draft a letter, have it served whatever manner you think is most appropriate considering the situation. You may know who the person is, and you might say, well, this needs a marshal, or regular mail might work. Certified mail, which our regs have certified mail return receipt. I don't like the return receipt. I would ditch the return receipt. Nobody signs green cards because there's never good news with a green card, never. I don't like the whole placard or placard on the property. Going to a property and putting a big sign out there saying, this is a zoning regulation violator. Yeah, we probably ought to ditch that, but I think it's extremely efficient.
So this would enable the recipient to receive the notice within minutes of it being identified rather than a week or so.
Absolutely, right there,
Right.
on site.
Right. But then at that point, the process would remain the same, right? There would be an appeals mechanism and.
It's this, yeah.
All the due
Mr. Town Planner,
process.
yeah, all due process. The U.S. Constitution trumps everything, and all due process would have to be taken place, and the appeal process would go forward.
Right.
Go ahead, Dan.
I have to say I'm a proponent of this because as a past code enforcement officer for the city of Atlanta and Atlanta, Georgia, it was a lot easier for me as a code enforcement officer to find the person, see them on the property, issue them the warning, the citation, give them a court date, and I saw them every week in court. The only downside is if the owner is not in the town of Newington. Would the person be able to cite them outside the town lines or just in the town lines?
Oh, no, well,
With that special requirement of being someone who can cite them,
Well-
how would you go about if the owner lived in Rocky Hill?
right, oftentimes, what you're dealing with is maybe a business, and what we would have is, a lot of these businesses have statutory agents with the Secretary of State. So you would serve it on the statutory agent, just as you would serve service of process, a lawsuit, same manner.
So let's talk about the blight of residential homes. How are we gonna go after landlords that don't live in town or don't live at the home and there's grass is 4 feet tall and there's 4 inoperable vehicles in the back, but you can't find the owner because they might be in another state? So we
Service
go
of
back to the
process,
original?
Long arm statute, you just serve them out of state.
Through the
By a
mail,
marshal.
by
I'd use a marshal.
Okay.
You never go wrong.
Okay.
It's worth the money.
Mr.
Attorney
Sobiesky.
Ancona, I have one quick question. You mentioned the ticket book. Is this going to be similar to what a police officer would issue, like a citation?
Yes, and
Okay.
okay, go ahead, I'm sorry, I
Okay.
interrupted you.
I'm a little slow sometimes. I want to get the second part of my question out.
Absolutely, I'm with you.
And does this mean that the zoning enforcement officer would have to be bonded in some way or covered so that as he's issuing this ticket, he would have the authority to do so?
Well, he's already authorized to issue citations. So all we're doing is making it so that the format is a simpler procedure. The format of the citation or the warning is in the form of a ticket. And so we're changing nothing in that regard.
So he doesn't have to have any special powers or anything like that, like a police officer would have? That's my bottom
No.
line here.
No, he's already entrusted with whatever he needs. So,
One more quick question. Is this how the other cities and towns do it? I'm just curious. Do you
Well,
know
I'm very familiar with New Britain.
okay.
And New Britain does it this way. It's
All right.
extremely efficient, and those guys are really pretty great. And they come out, and a lot of times, I have some property there, and they will actually call ahead and say, hey, somebody dumped a mattress in your front yard. I know you didn't do it because you don't do this.
Right.
But before I come out there and give you, they don't have the warning. They come out,
Right.
you get a ticket. So, but what they do is a lot of times they'll just call you and say, I know you don't handle your properties this way. There's a mattress out there or a couch or whatever. Come grab it.
That's all I was curious. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Payne.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be very efficient for the zoning enforcement officer. He could also, make copies of the sign regulations or whatever other violation it is. He could clip it with the, ticket to hand it to the owner so that they know. And I like the idea of the warning box because, if the, person that's making the violation, if they decide to bring it to an appeal board, I'd like the fact that that the zoning enforcement officer has either given them 1 or 2 warnings, and that way, if they try to appeal this, they'll see that they've already given them 2 warnings, and the third time, that's it, you gotta, less chance of the appeal board citing, going with the, resident instead of
Right, and the ultimate goal is compliance. That's the ultimate goal.
Where, who do they appeal to? Do they appeal to the courts in New Britain, or?
No, we still have our appeal process pursuant to Section 13, which would continue just as it has been continued.
Which is what?
Right in this building. It's an appeal to an administrative hearing officer appointed by the town manager.
And how many of those do we have?
I think we have just
I think we
one
have
at this,
two.
two right
I
now?
think we have two.
Okay. Mike, you have some questions, I'm sure.
Not at this point, I guess we'll just look at, so the language, so it would be an ordinance change for the blight portion and then a text amendment for the zoning portion, correct? Or would it just be an ordinance that would apply?
No, you're
Okay.
doing a text amendment here, they're doing their own thing.
Okay.
Okay, so you're gonna get us the draft, we haven't seen it. So you-
No, I'm a little slow. I didn't realize what we were talking about, but it dawned on me about 30 seconds later. I do have it. I've had it for some time. I thought tonight we were talking about something different, but I realized that's, no problem.
No problem.
Right, and I'll share it with the commissioners first thing tomorrow.
Okay. How does the commission want to proceed with this? If you get the information from the town planner this week, you want to put it on the agenda for action, or
Yes.
what do we have to do? Have a public hearing?
Well, let's put on the agenda for you to look at, and then if it's everything that you think you hope it would be, we'll schedule for a hearing a month later, because that's how long the lead time that's required,
Okay.
okay?
So would you like to put it on for the next meeting for discussion?
Yes.
To go over what the attorney is presenting? And then if we agree to what it is, we'll put it on for the following one.
Right.
Following meeting.
Well, 2 meetings later.
Yeah, 2 meetings later. Okay, looks like that's a consensus, so that's the way we're gonna proceed. Just get us the information and put it on the agenda.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Ben, I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Okay, next item on the agenda is the remarks by commissioners. Any commissioner remarks at this time? Stanley?
Yes, I attended the walkthrough along with Commissioner Payne, Commissioner Camello, and Commissioner Fox. And I understand at the last Economic Development Commission meeting, Mr. Brecker had said that there was the residents were banding together and that an out-of-state developer was trying to get these people on board to sell their property or combine properties and looking for a zone change. I didn't hear that when I was out there. Maybe I missed that part of it. I know the residents were concerned, and a lot of them didn't want to do any changes in there. So I don't know what's coming from here, but I thought this commission was the one that was looking at the area there for the TOD. Thank you.
Mr. Planner, you want to?
Well, I know that if you go to the assessor's records, you'll see that there are a couple of LLCs that seem to have acquired a lot of property in that area over the last decade or so. So that might be what he's alluding to.
Any commissioner comments on that? Commissioner Fox?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I saw was there was one resident that, for some reason or other, I think Commissioner Camillo had mentioned something to him, that the house, the property would raise in value, and he got all excited and said, "You're not going to make me sell my house, are you?" I think that was the whole thing.
Stanley, the opinion of this commission is that we're not doing eminent domain. We're not forcing anybody to sell. We're not forcing anybody to make changes to their property. If someone could go in and amass the property and buy the properties and put together some pieces, well, that's fine. If they can't, that's fine too. But we're not advocating that the people in that area have to sell their property, or we're taking it by eminent domain, or we're changing anything with their property. It's still gonna be the underlying zone. It's gonna be an overlay zone on top of that. And, I don't see the downside of it at this point. Any other commissioner remarks? Bob, anything?
On a different note, if I can, a thought on the moratorium and the sign issue we're having. I wasn't at the last meeting, I apologize, I had something come up. But I did read the notes from the last meeting, I did see some of the TV coverage. We've been looking at the sign issue as a body, as a whole for the town. And I think we're boxing ourselves into a corner. I think what we may need to do is look at this like we did the moratorium for the fast tracks. 2 separate areas. One for the Berlin Turnpike, one for Town Center, Fenn Road, Cedar Street. Because Berlin Turnpike, the sign regulations are a little bit different depending on the building, the square footage, they get more signage. It's a little different in the center with the smaller shops. So I think if we broke this down into the areas, into the town center, the Berlin Turnpike, and worked them maybe individually instead of as a whole, maybe we can come up with something a little better than what we have so far. I just think we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole and it's not working. I think if we divide this and do it in, as I said, Town Center, Berlin Turnpike, Fenn Road, Cedar Street, because what's going to apply in one area may not necessarily work in another. So I just want to put that out there, and you know, if anybody agrees or has any other ideas, I'd love to hear them. But if you don't agree, that's fine too. But that's how we get things done. We put it out there, we work on it, and we try to come up with a consensus.
Any commissioner comments to that?
I have to agree. 'Cause that's one thing that the business people have been telling us over at the EDC, that what we do here in the center or anywhere really does not pertain to the turnpike. And they're really up in arms, to be honest with you. And I don't know what we can do on the turnpike. I mean, the state takes such a large right of way, and if we were to adhere to the right of way, I don't think they'd have a sign where you can see it anyway. So we have to do something for them.
How does that, Bob, I'm a little lost, how does that pertain to the moratorium? Are you suggesting that we relax the moratorium, or?
No, not at all, but
moratorium?
no, I'm not suggesting we relax it. What I'm suggesting is like we did with the Cedar Street stations and
Suggesting two different regulations?
two different regulations for those 2 different areas, or, well, possibly 3 because of Fenn Road and Cedar Street. We'd have to see how we would fit them in. But, you know, I think it would be easier for our ZEO, too. We'd have a more defined regulation for each area.
The regulation that the town planner gave us a draft of at the last meeting, I don't know if you got it. Did you get that draft of?
It was in the agenda.
Yeah, I
package for
believe
this
I did,
meeting.
yes.
Okay. One of the items in there is that there are to be no temporary signs on the Berlin Turnpike. That this regulation is going to be specifically for the town center in the neighborhood business zones, and and the reason for that is that the discussions I had with the town planner and going over this is that we're trying to protect our brand in Newington. There's an obvious difference between when you drive the Berlin Turnpike from Weathersfield into Newington and from Newington into Berlin. It's obvious where the town line's on. You don't even have to know where the sign says that you're leaving Newington, because it's obvious by the property and the way the development that we've had over the years on the turnpike. This is nothing new on the Berlin Turnpike. Berlin Turnpike, we've been working on this for as long as I've been involved in zoning, goes back to the 70s. And it preceded me. It's been years and years that the town zoning board, all the commissioners on all these different zoning boards have taken that Berlin Turnpike and tried to make it into something special, something where it's a economic engine for the town of Newington, and that's where we're at, I think. And to go back to the signage issue, I mean, we allowed the Berlin Turnpike to have more signage than any other place in the town of Newington. They actually get, double the signage than anyone else. And I think Mike had a good point, the point of the right-of-ways in the town of Newington on the Berlin Turnpike from the DOT eat into half of these properties. What you see there is these people are parking on, and they're not even parking on their own property. They're parking on DOT right-of-way. And I know that the regulation that was put forward was that we would allow A-frame 5 feet from the door of the business, but that doesn't do any good for someone on the Berlin Turnpike that's has their business in a plaza.
And the reason why I brought up the Berlin Turnpike and part of this discussion, in meetings past, we have discussed what do we do on the Berlin Turnpike. We have discussed things there. That's why I brought that up as part of this, as far as looking at it into, separate sections. But I mean, if that's a regulation we're going to go with, then you're right. Then Berlin Turnpike's not even in the picture on this. But we still have Cedar, Fen Road. We still have other areas we got to look at.
Yeah, but those are all going to be pretty much the same as the center business, these neighborhood business. Sorry, am I correct?
Yeah, yes. I was
We
waiting to
would
see if
treat
you
them the
had to finish.
same way. I think I can't come up with a way to pacify the businesses that are on the Berlin Turnpike. I mean, it doesn't work, because I could just see these A-frame signs in the state right-of-way, all up and down the Berlin Turnpike. And that's in violation of the regulations as they stand today, and it's against the state of Connecticut. I got, Stan provided me with information from the DOT where they specifically say that they don't want anything in their right-of-ways. They don't want signage. They don't want anything. Any commissioner comments or
Well,
Mr.
I'd like to
Planner?
follow up on that. I think Commissioner Sarah is onto something. Maybe what the commission can do at your meeting next week on the 28th, when you discuss whether to extend the moratorium, when you have that discussion, you could talk about extending the moratorium, but only on the Berlin Turnpike, and then open up the rest of the town for the same kind of temporary signs that we've always had. And then when you adopt a new regulation, which would then be limited to A-frames and 5 feet from the property and all those things that you want, that would be a good thing. I think that would be a good regulation. But at least between the 28th of June and whenever you do adopt what I've suggested, merchants elsewhere in town will be able, for a couple more months, have the old style temporary sign. Just a suggestion, but that's something that we can definitely discuss
permitted.
on the 28th.
Permitted signs.
Exactly.
Mr. Payne?
I think, like it was stated several meetings ago, until we get the enforcement under control, it won't matter whether you have a regulation in place or not. We have a lot of illegal signs out there now, but we have a moratorium. So I think we need to wait until this ticket system comes in and see if it works and if it speeds things up and corrects things. But just because you have a regulation for people that are businesses that are not on the Berlin Turnpike, that doesn't mean that those people, those businesses aren't going to put those A-frame signs in the street right away, even if they're not on the Berlin Turnpike. So the same problem that you're trying to prevent on the Berlin Turnpike can happen everywhere. And I think we need to come up with a sign regulation that's consistent and fair for all businesses. Thank you.
You suggesting that we include the Berlin Turnpike with an A-frame sign?
If the chamber said that they would live with the signs next to their doorways, then I don't see a harm with that, because if they move them next to the right-of-way, it's a violation. And that violation could happen anywhere else that you have the same regulation. So I think a lot of this was driven by just a handful of residents, a handful of business owners that just did not want to comply with the regulations. And they continued not to comply with it until it came to a head here. And hopefully this ticket system can control it when we put the regulations back in. And I would not want to put it back into the Berlin Turnpike unless we could have the, I wouldn't want to put it back into the regulations for the Berlin Turnpike or anywhere in town unless we had a really good regulation.
Commissioner Claffey.
I have a few fears on temp signs being allowed and designating different parts of the community to have different regulations is just muddying the waters, in my mind. But if you take a temp sign, a proposed zoning text amendment, you look at what's allowed, proposing, if you look at either the Stop and Shop Plaza at Fenn Road, the Best Market Plaza, Lowry, and then look at Main Street and Lowry Place, you could probably count 50 temporary sign A-frames that you're gonna have on the streets of Newington, in just those locations. Take every business there that then can get one per business storefront. I mean, TJ's, Cakery, all those people could have them going right up within 5 feet on the main drag. That's a lot of blight in some people's eyes, because they're all not gonna match. Okay, they're gonna be 2 by 3, 12, within 12 square on each side, no more than 5 feet. But try to walk down Main Street in front of Roosters when you got 8 temporary A-frame signs all the way down the main beautiful brickwork that we have. It's going to start to look like what we're trying to get rid of. It's not going to look good. That's all I got to say.
Mr. Sobieski.
Yes, I agree with Bob. We've got two different areas here. Berlin Turnpike has to be under state custody and control. We look at the center of town, we've got to look to find out what's going to work. We need to get some type of compromise here, but we definitely need to split these apart. Because what's going to work in the center of town is not going to work on the Berlin Turnpike. And I don't know, I'm not an attorney, but just off the top of my head, if you're going to put A-frame signs okay in this area, but not in this area, you may have a problem. I don't know. But I'm just saying that if you're going to allow one area of town to have A-frame signs, I think they should be allowed all over, or else take them out of there completely. Or else, as I said, split the zones.
Well, to counter that, we give the people on the Berlin Turnpike double the signage. We don't do that anywhere else in town. So that takes care of your argument about being preferential to different people or different zones. So I think we just got to fight through it and put it on the agenda, have the discussion, and see what we could come up with. I mean, we have to have the moratorium stay in place, or else you're going to have chaos in town.
At the last meeting, I thought there was going to be a subcommittee from the EDC that was going to look at something and get back to us. Am I correct, Mr. Commissioner Bain?
They did.
They did. Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
as well, yeah, we finished with that. Once we finish with the signs, I'd like to go back to the issue of Mr. Becker talking, mentioning what was happening at the site walk and everything at the EDC, and just basically, real quick, I have to object to him doing that, and I just wanted to put that on record.
Okay. Where are we? Next item on the agenda is a public hearing. I have the, who has the procedure?
That's good.
Give it
Vice
to,
Chairman?
give it to Dominic, he likes to read. We'll have the Vice Chairman read the procedures which we follow for a public hearing. And we have two public hearings tonight.
The procedures for public hearing. The order of proceedings at a public hearing shall be the following. A, convening by the chairman. B, reading of the notice by the commission secretary or a commissioner designated by the chairman to act in his stead. C, identification and location of the property involved by the town planner. D, a statement of the issue to be considered by the chairman or the town planner. E, presentation by the applicant limited to 20 minutes unless a specific extension is granted by the chair. F, persons wishing to speak in favor of the application are limited to 2 minutes per person. G, persons wishing to speak in opposition to the application limited to 3 minutes per person. H, rebuttal by the applicant limited to 5 minutes total. And I, rebuttal of the opposition limited to 5 minutes total. During a public hearing, it shall be within the discretion of the chairman whether the time limitations should be varied slightly, provided the commission consents to any such variance. In no case shall an extension be for more than 20% of the allotment indicated above, or 1 minute, whichever is greater.
Could you please read petition 19-17?
Petition 1917, special permit, section 3.2.5, school, to conduct a day programming for adults with intellectual disabilities at 652 Willard Avenue, St. Mary's School, Catholic Charities, Archdiocese of Hartford. Applicant, St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church Corporation. Owner, Cynthia McKenna. Catholic Charities, 839, 841 Asylum Avenue, Hartford, Connecticut. Contact.
Is the applicant here? Okay, will you please come forward, state your name and address for the record, and make a presentation for us, please?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, the Director of Planning and Zoning Office. My name is Marek Kukulka. I'm the CEO of Catholic Charities. And with me today is Mr. Douglas DeSerbo.
Excuse me, Mayor, could you spell your last name for the clerk?
Kukulka.
Thank you.
And with me is also Mr. Douglas DeSerbo. He's the Director of Residential Programs at Catholic Charities.
Please spell his last name.
Good evening. D-E-C-E-R-B-O.
Thank you very much.
So we're here today to ask for a special permission for Catholic Charities to provide human services, including services to people with disabilities, and those would be intellectual and developmental disabilities, and those would be a day programming at the school, St. Mary's School in Newington. I'm not sure if you would like to know what that would entail.
Yeah, give us I think we all have an idea, but give us an overview of what the program is and
Currently,
how many people we're talking about, and give us some specifics.
Currently, our population are those intellectually disabled who are able to integrate into the community. So what we do now is we have our clients have day programming in our facilities and integrate into the community by going into libraries and using community resources. This school would provide an opportunity for us to provide educational services for our clients. The clients are ages anywhere from 24 to 90, some of them. And we would be looking at doing wellness activities. We'd be looking at doing pre-vocational type activities, such as things with culinary and educational things, first for our clients and then for other clients that are in day programs. Where I think this would be beneficial to the town of Newington, right now there are difficulties providing services for youth when they age out of the school systems. And there aren't any day programs or education programs in the community once those clients leave the school. And this would provide an opportunity for them to end up to come to that school. And again, there would be educational activities and a variety of wellness activities that we would provide at the school. We would start with 10 students, and we would look to grow it in terms of probably like, I would say groups of 5, because then we would have to start adding staff as we move along. And we would propose to do it slowly, because whenever you start a program, you want to start it, you want to make it successful, and you want to really get the community involved and start to build it slowly.
What is the schedule? Is this a year-round program?
This would be a year-round program.
And what are the hours?
The hours would essentially, the operation of the program would be from 9 to 3, but you would have transportation or some programming prior, so you're probably looking like 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock when that building would be mostly operational. There might be some evening activities, just like you have in a school when you have parents come in or you do some events as part of the program, but essentially it would be in that 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock block.
Okay. Any questions from the commissioner as to the program that they're
Just a quick question, something I'm reading in the handout. The administrative offices for group homes and other social services will also be located in the St. Mary's School building. Now, those are other groups associated with you, or we will be subleasing to other groups?
That would be our program, and predominantly myself, the assistant director of residential or developmental services, and the 2 administrative assistants, and maybe a couple of other people, but it would be Catholic Charity staff, okay, predominantly for that program.
Okay, thank you.
How many staff per student ratio?
The ratio would be 1 to 3. And in some instances, there might be a 1-to-1 for someone if they're in a wheelchair or particular. So, but it would be at no more than 1 to 3. It could be less depending on the particular individual.
Any other questions from the commissioners for the applicant?
I'm sorry, just one more. Now, these folks that you would have coming in, just for the record, I just want to clarify, this is nonviolent, no issues to the public?
No.
Okay.
Mr. Planner?
Might act out and yell and scream a little bit.
No,
As a matter of fact, they do.
No, that's fine. I have no problem with it. It's questions that may come up from other residents. I just want to put them at ease. Yes. That's why I brought that up.
Yes.
Mr. Planner?
Mr. DeSerbo, I heard you say our clients and other clients. What did you mean by other clients?
Well, we would start with the clients that we have now in the program. What we were looked to do over a period of time, open it up. For instance, as I said before, if there are clients who are aging out of the school systems and have nowhere to go, they might choose to come into that program at some point.
Okay, I guess you're using client as a euphemism for a person who needs your service.
I'm sorry, student.
They're not clients until someone takes them on. So
right, so student.
So in other words, new clients.
Yes, new, right.
Got it.
Sorry.
Thank you. Got it. Thanks.
Apologize.
Mr. Payne?
So like a transition academy, is that correct? As they can't, as they grow to a certain age, over 18 in the school system, and they still need help to get into the community and get a job and to work. That's basically
that's basically it. But some of them will stay in group homes and just come to this program ongoing.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? Seeing none, just take your seat back in the audience, and we'll open it up for the public, for public comment. We'll ask at this time for people wishing to speak in favor of this application, come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Gail Bedraco, 21 Isabel Terrace. I'm in favor of this petition for several reasons. First of all, it does not appear that there'll be any impact to the towns in terms of additional traffic, cars, or additional services required from the town. Although this is a different use from what the school was before, I contend that it's not really a substantial stretch. It's still going to be used for educational purposes, although different age group, different maybe level of capabilities. But it still will be providing skills and training with the goal of community integration. The clients are adults with intellectual disabilities, and that to me is a very substantially underserved population. And particularly in light of the current cuts to DSS and more budget cuts to be coming, these clients are most at risk. The program serves a need. Additionally, Catholic Charities has group residence for adults with intellectual disabilities who are in workshops throughout several communities. And according to their website, they also have a residence here in Newington. So there's a possibility that actually some current Newington residents would be participating in this program at some time. So generally, I think it's a great program. It serves a need for an underserved population. It fits the facility. It's not going to really impact Newington at all, and actually I think we'd be proud to have it housed here in Newington. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public wishing to speak in favor of this application?
Rose Lyons, 46 Elton Drive. I believe from what I'm hearing that it would be a good use for that facility, having been the...
Hang on, Rose.
Having been in the class of 1960 from St. Mary's School, I like to see that it's being used for the Archdiocese purpose. I just had a question whether this is an established program that the clients will be coming to the facility, or is it a brand new program where they're going to be getting new clients in? And I think it would be a great idea if we have a next step from our transition academy to another facility to serve their needs.
I think he answered that questions in his presentation, that they do have clients now. They have 10, I believe the number was 10 clients at this point.
We serve them in our existing facilities now, and they would go to the school, but then it would.
There's only 10 now?
To start, yeah.
Oh, okay. But you'll take on more.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of this application, please come forward, state your name and address.
My name is Charlotte DeBoer, 103 Raynell Road in Newington, and I am in favor of this petition. I think that Newington would be very well served to have this facility available to the residents that do have a need, that have, disabilities, and to have it close by to them where they don't have to be bused and shuttled to other towns and facilities. So I am absolutely in favor of this. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of this application? Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I will open it up to opposition.
Did you want to ask if anyone was opposed?
Yes, I'm going to open it up to the opposition. Is there anyone here that is opposed to this application? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to this? Okay, seeing none, what is the pleasure of the commission? Do you want to?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion that we close petition 19-17 and move it to old business for action for tonight.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're gonna move this to old business and take a vote on it tonight. So we'll put that, as item. Old business got B.
You
Okay.
can check with the planner in the morning.
Okay, the next petition is, petition 1417, Dominic.
Petition 1417, zoning text amendment to revise waiver provisions, various sections, town planning and zoning commission applicant.
Is there a planner, please present the application for the
Okay,
town.
with the chairman's indulgence, I'll just read my memo because that summarizes the situation, I think, pretty succinctly. As do many towns in Connecticut, Newington's zoning regulations contain several provisions that give TPZ the ability to waive or modify the regulations on a case-by-case basis. In 2016, the Connecticut Superior Court ruled in Centaur CRSO versus P&Z that zoning regulations that do this are illegal. Only the ZBA has the legal authority to grant variances. The Superior Court felt that waivers and modifications are the same thing as variances. However, early this year, the Superior Court softened that position somewhat when it ruled that waiver provisions could be legal so long as there was a specific purpose and specific criteria. The changes proposed in this amendment will bring Newington's waiver and modification provisions into compliance with Centaur CRSO versus PZC. Where I wasn't able to propose a purpose and criteria, I recommended deleting it. The proposed amendment will give specific purpose and criteria to the existing buffer requirement waivers, the existing parking for other uses not listed waiver, the existing waiver to restrictions on the removal of earth products, the existing waivers to maximum and minimum slope requirements, and the existing waivers to curb requirements. The proposed amendment will delete some of the existing waiver regulations for reasons that are explained in the amendment document. The waiver to the regulations regarding buildings within 50 feet of a wetland, the wholesale parking requirement waiver, and the waiver on some LID requirements. And now, Mr. Chairman, I'll go through the amendment basically section by section. Section 3.14.3 talks about waivers to the buffer regulation, and I'm proposing the following specific purpose. The purpose of this waiver is to allow development in the buffer area where the land use, I can't even read it, it's too small. Let me pump it up here. Okay. The purpose of this waiver is to allow development in the buffer area where the land use, landscaping or architecture, in the adjacent residential zone is such that its residential character will not be impacted by development in the buffer area, or where severe topography on either side of the zone boundary will provide sufficient buffering. And the criteria would be significant natural or introduced vegetation, severe topography, or the specific design or location of buildings in the adjacent residential zone. And then actually this buffer provision appears in two sections. It appears in the BBT zone and also in the PD zone, but it's the same language, so I'm recommending the same change to it. Now the next waiver regulation that I'm suggesting we change is in the height, area, and yard requirements section, where it talks about, make sure I'm not missing something here, 4.6, certified by soils. Yeah, okay. This is the section in the zoning regulations that, in fact, it's so strange, I'm just going to read it. No principal building shall be placed or constructed within 50 feet of a regulated inland wetland or watercourse, as shown on the maps entitled Designated Inland Wetlands and Watercourses of the Town of Newington, or on a detailed soils map certified by a soil scientist and approved by the Zoning Conservation Commission. This setback standard may be modified upon the receipt of a favorable report from the Conservation Commission and 2/3 vote of the Commission. So what that says is P&Z cannot allow the construction of I'll just say a house, within 50 feet of a wetland unless the Conservation Commission has approved it and it's approved by a 2/3 vote of your commission. Well, once the Conservation Commission has approved it, they've approved it. In fact, they already have to. They have their own laws, which require them to approve it. So there's no reason for the zoning regulations to repeat what the laws already require of someone who wants to build in the wetland or buffer area. But on top of that, This makes someone, after they've gotten their wetlands permit, come to you and get permission from you also, but only by a 2/3 vote. It just really doesn't make any sense. So I'm suggesting that this section be deleted because it doesn't provide any extra protection for the wetlands, because the Wetlands Commission still has to approve it before anything can happen, but it adds an additional step in the process, so it delays people's plans to get their building approved. It makes them come to you, to the Planning Commission for a pointless exercise. So I'm recommending that it be deleted. The next section where there's a waiver is in the parking regulations. Now, the parking regulations currently say that for other uses not listed, that the amount of parking required would be 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross area, but that the commission may waive this requirement. And what I'm suggesting is, let's just change that to for uses not already listed in the parking section of the regs. If it's a use that's not listed, then the amount of parking required would be as determined by the commission. Because there are lots of uses out there that don't fall neatly into any of the handful of categories that we've created. But when you get one of those, when you get a site plan for some use that we don't currently have a category for, the applicant will present to you how much parking he's proposing, and I'll do research to see whether that's appropriate based on what other towns have provided, and your own sense of whether the applicant has proposed a reasonable amount of property or amount of parking. And that seems to be a more reasonable way to handle the businesses for whom the amount of parking is not already covered in your regulations. Okay. Now the next, all right, now there's a kind of a catch-all waiver provision in the parking regulations, which says that these regulations, the entire chapter on parking regulations, may be modified by the commission where the circumstances are relating, and it goes on to usual verbiage. That's just too broad. And I thought about thought about whether it would make sense to try to create a specific waiver provision for each of the different sections in the parking chapters, such as the other requirements section, the parking spaces for buildings section, the parking spaces for other uses. And it just got to be kind of overwhelming. And as I mentioned in my report here, in the 5 years I've been here, I've never had anybody even ask me for a waiver from the parking regulations. So I suggest we just delete that waiver provision completely. The next section is in the removal of earth products. One of the rules, or the rule is that no site plan shall provide for, the site plan shall provide for proper drainage. No bank shall exceed a slope of 1 foot of vertical rise and 2 feet of horizontal distance, unless waived. All right, so what I'm suggesting that we keep this, but we give it a specific purpose and a specific criteria. And that the purpose is to allow removal of earth products within 50 feet of a property line where such removal will not impact the adjacent property. And the criteria would be there shall be no improvement or planned improvement on the adjacent property within 50 feet of the property line. So in other words, as long as there's nothing on the other side of the property line, within 50 feet of the other side of the property line, they'd be eligible for the waiver. But they'd have to show you that there are no homes, there's nothing on the other, within 50 feet of the property line to be eligible for the waiver, which would still be at your discretion. Now, also in the section on earth removal of earth products, there's a requirement that says at the conclusion of operations, the whole area where removal is taking place shall be covered with not less than 4 inches of topsoil and seeded with a suitable crop cover, which seems pretty reasonable. But then it goes on to say, this requirement may be modified by the commission where no practical purpose is accomplished by adherence to it. Well, since this last sentence is probably there because there are situations where there's ledge or bedrock that would make it impossible for the applicant to put topsoil, and there wouldn't even be any reason for it. I'm just suggesting we revise this to simply say this requirement shall not apply to exposed areas that are ledge or bedrock. The next waiver provision in the removal of earth products section says that no equipment not required for actual removal of the material shall be allowed. The processing of earth product is prohibited except when permitted by the commission and approved by 2/3 vote. So in other words, you can do it, but it requires a 2/3 vote. Well, let me just read my memo here. There are times when processing earth products on site makes sense, such as when rock that needs to be removed can be converted into gravel that is needed for the project. It reduces the amount of truck traffic to and from the construction site and saves the developer money. Since the removal of earth products already requires a special permit, which requires a public hearing, a need for the activity, character of the neighborhood, safeguards to protect adjacent properties, etc., there's no need for a total ban on processing earth products. I suggest that processing of earth products be made a separate special permit activity instead. All right, almost done. Stormwater management. Currently, the regulation says that at the end of the chapter of the section, it says that unless modified by the commission, every application shall provide for a stormwater management system, including low-impact development techniques as specified in this section. I recommend deleting the phrase unless modified by the commission. And the reason I'm recommending that is the LID regulations already contain the very forgiving phrase to the maximum extent practicable. So there's really no need for the zoning regulations to contain even more relief. And I can tell you that has been the practice of the town since we adopted this regulation, the LID regs, back in 2015. We've had many applications come before us where the applicant showed that they have provided as much as possible, and the staff has always been reasonable about that, and I don't see that changing. And the commission has been reasonable about that. As everybody knows, the soils in Newington are not very good. And in the cases where a site does have soil that's suitable for infiltration, the staff requires that the applicant do it. But if it's all clay and ledge, the staff isn't being unreasonable about it. So there's really no need for that to be in this regulation. The next waiver refers to when the site plan is being prepared, elevations, grades, existing and proposed. Unless modified by the commission in order to implement LID, minimum continuous slope across grass shall be 1%, minimum slope across pavement shall be 0.6%, and maximum slope across parking lot shall be 5%. So I'm suggesting that we assign a purpose to this waiver rule, and the purpose is the commission may modify the minimum and maximum slope requirements to allow for a more efficient LID. And the criteria would be the commission may modify the minimum and maximum slope requirements if it finds that such modification results in a more effective LID design. And then under curbs and sidewalks for public streets, the requirement for curbing on a public street may be modified or waived by the commission in order to implement low-impact development techniques. And I'm just suggesting we beef this up by saying that the commission may modify or waive the requirement to allow for more effective LID, and that the criteria are the commission may modify or waive the curbing requirement if it finds that such modification results in a more effective LID. And then for curbs that would otherwise be required in private property, the same purpose and the same criteria. Yeah, and again, for other development not requiring approval by the commission, the curbing requirement can be waived. And once again, the same purpose and criteria I'm proposing. And then finally, the last modification regulation reads that these requirements may be modified. I'm sorry, okay, and this one, 7.4.26, refers to the entire chapter on what information needs to be on a site plan, which is several pages. These requirements may be modified or reduced by the commission if it finds that unusual or special conditions, including increasing the utilization of LID, warrant a waiver. Okay, that's just too broad. That's wholesale. And as I said in my memo, that's the kind of wholesale waivers that got the town of Monroe in trouble, which is what led to the original court decision. So I recommend we just delete this paragraph. So that's it, Mr. Chairman. Any questions? I can certainly go back and talk about any of these items.
Any commissioner questions on the changes to the regulations? Commissioner Sobieski.
Under 6.4, item D, what happens if you have too much material on the property?
All right, 6.4 point D, let me.
Right, you said no equipment required for actual removal of materials should be allowed. Processing of various problem prohibited except when permitted by the commission.
Right, okay.
Right. So now I have a project, I've excavated, I've got a ton of piles of rock that I'm not going to need. All right?
Okay.
Now, you're telling me that I can apply for a permit to get this off my property, am I correct?
Not exactly. You have to get that plan approved in the first place, and you're gonna show in your plan how much rock you need to remove to do whatever it is you want to do, build a house, add on to your shopping center, whatever the reason is for why you need to remove all this rock, you need to come in for a site plan approval. And your engineer has figured out that you need to remove X cubic yards of rock. Well, when you make that presentation, you, the applicant, to the commission, and you show the commission that you need to remove a lot of rock, currently, you can remove it because you need to make room for your house, your shopping center, or whatever. But under the current regulation, you wouldn't be allowed to process it and use it on site for gravel, which in some cases might make perfect sense, as I say, because if you need gravel anyway, and you've got rock that's in the way, wouldn't it make sense to convert that rock to gravel right there on site with appropriate dust controls, noise controls, hours of operation, all the things that you'd want to regulate before you would let something like this go on in any neighborhood. But this would make it possible for that to take place.
I guess what I'm looking at is, I'm going to use Toll Brothers as an example. They were going to have tons of rock left over.
Well, okay, now let me interrupt. When you say leftover, you mean there were tons of rock that they needed to remove from the site?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I believe part of the issue was that this could be turned into a quarrying process, basically, up there, where they're going to crush the rock small enough to get it off site.
Well, let's back up. Let's break that down. Okay. Hypothetically, they've submitted their site plan. The staff has reviewed the plan, and the staff has determined that they're not trying to remove any more rock than they need to for the project. So it's not a stealth quarry. They legitimately need to remove a lot of rock. Then the only question is, are you going to make them remove all the rock and bring back gravel, or are you going to let them keep some of the rock on site, process it into gravel, and use it on site?
I just don't want this to, as a backdoor way of doing small type of quarrying. That's all I was concerned with there.
Right, and that's a good point. And the key is the staff review of the plan to make sure that it's not a stealth, either sand and gravel excavation or topsoil or any other earth material that certain developers are known to, for that to be the real goal of their project. And it isn't really to build one house on a 20-acre site. It's really to mine all the nice topsoil or gravel or whatever. But that's where the staff review comes in, to prevent that from happening.
One other quick question. One above it, you said that within 50 feet of property line, they're going to be allowed to remove some material. Let's assume that there's a vacant lot there. You know, okay, I'm going 50 feet and I'm going to remove the material. Then 2 years later, I sell the lot. And this could have an adverse effect on that lot. That's what I'm asking.
Okay. The developer who's asking for relief owns up to the property line, and somebody else owns on the other side of the property line.
Right.
To be eligible for the waiver, the developer needs to show what's going on the other side of the property line, on the neighbor's property. And the developer needs to satisfy you that whatever's going on the neighbor's property won't be harmed by him being allowed to excavate closer than this kind of arbitrary 50-foot line.
What I'm saying is, okay, if the guy next door that owns that property isn't going to do anything with it this year. Maybe not next year. Maybe the year after he will, after I've already created this or did what I had to do. Is there any relief to make sure that this isn't going to happen? That's what I'm asking.
Right, good point. Let's say a developer comes to you with a request to be allowed to excavate up to like 20 feet from the edge of the property, and at the moment it's just a vacant lot. That developer would have to really convince you that it's going to remain a vacant lot for a long time, or it's part of the backyard of a large piece of property, the owner of which would not be impacted. And this is by special permit, so that property owner would be notified and would have the opportunity to come to the hearing and speak against it if he felt that it would impact his future plans for his property.
I just want to make sure everybody's protected here, that's all.
Certainly.
Any other commissioner comments, questions? Okay, what is the pleasure of the commission on this? I'm sorry, we have to open it up. Anyone from the public wishing to speak in favor of this application? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Okay, seeing none, what is the pleasure of the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we close petition 14-17.
Second.
Motion made and second. You want to move it to old business for next time?
I was just thinking that, yeah, move it to old business for next meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's part of the motion. Any questions on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so put it on for,
Next week.
action,
Good.
yeah.
Thank you.
That ends the public portion of the hearing. We'll move into the rest of the hearing, rest of the agenda. Approval of minutes, May 10th, and,
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
no, that's under C.
Yeah,
That
new
that
business.
doesn't go there, it goes under.
That'll be new business.
Oh, okay.
All right.
May 10th and May 24th meeting.
May.
Make a motion to approve both May 10th and the
May,
24th.
I'm sorry.
Second.
Motion made, any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I have to abstain from the May 10th.
Okay, let the record show that Mike abstained from the May 10th vote. Next item on the agenda is new business petition 2317. You want to read that, Dominic?
Petition 23-17, TPZ approval, section 3.23.1, accessory outside use to sell fireworks at 3413 Berlin Turnpike, Olympia Diner, Keystone Fireworks applicant, 3413 Berlin Turnpike LLC, owner Chris Costello, Keystone Fireworks, 201 Seymour Street, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Contact.
Is the applicant here?
My name's Neil Shaw from Attleboro, Massachusetts, here for Keystone. Basically, this is just moving the tent from where it used to be, which is now Ashley Furniture, to the Olympic Diner in their parking lot. Originally, it was submitted to have it like on the lawn, but it was too close to the neighbor, so now it's supposed to be right in the parking lot.
Yeah, the site plan that's in the packet, disregard that because that shows the tent actually on the neighbor's property. The color map that was on the table when he sat down, that's the correct one. And that shows the tent entirely on the Olympia Diner parking lot. And both of those plans have been reviewed by police and fire have no objections.
Commissioner comments or remarks? Bob?
Mr. Planner, I'm sure you've looked into this. How does that affect the parking for Olympia Diner for their customers? Do they still have enough parking? What's the situation there?
Right. To be honest, I started to review it to see whether the loss of these 4 spaces would bring down the amount of parking that Olympia has. But since I don't know what the interior configuration of Olympia is, I don't know how much parking they need. But at the end of the day, it's only going to be for, what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So even though it may reduce the amount of parking below the amount required by your regulation, it's only for 2 weeks. And the landlord, the owner of Olympia Diner, agreed to it. So, and he knows best how much parking he really needs. So I'm not concerned about it.
The tent takes up approximately 4.5 parking spots.
And there'll be the loss of spaces by customers for the fireworks, which could be several at one time. Mm-hmm.
And that's my concern. Customers coming in, for the diner, you got customers coming in for the fireworks. I understand it's usually pretty quick, it's in and out. I just want to make sure there's enough parking there, that's all.
Well, what we can do is certainly document it, and if Keystone wants to use this location again next year, we'll do the research, we'll keep track of it to make sure that if there was a problem, that will be known next year when they come back.
Any other comments? Mike?
Through the chairman, are they going to be, what kind of signage are you going to use?
Very little, actually. There's signs that are on the tent itself, but nothing is out on the turnpike.
Nothing on the turnpike. Thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioner comments? No. I could just tell you, I'm very familiar with this site. I live up on Church Street, so I go by this site every day. I have never seen cars parked in that location at Olympia Diner, even when they're full. No one ever parks way up at the south end of the site. We'll monitor it, and we'll see if we find that it was a problem with the number of cars, and then next year we'll have to do something different. But I think we should give him a shot and let him do it. He had a nice location at Ashley's, but apparently they choose not to have him there. Any other commissioner remarks? Okay.
I didn't prepare a draft motion since it was new business.
When are you gonna be starting?
It's supposed to open on June 23rd and close July 5th. And the tent would actually go up like 2 or 3 days before that to allow the town to inspect.
Yep.
Because the fire department has to give its blessing that everything's nice. And then after the 5th, when it closes, they pack up on the 6th. And so the tent will probably come down on the 7th or 8th.
Okay. Could we get a motion to move this to old business and act on it tonight so that he could proceed?
Second.
Motion made and second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're gonna act on it tonight under old business, which is coming up pretty soon.
Thank you.
Next item, Dominic.
Newington Junction TOD Overlay District, Town Planning and Zoning Commission applicant.
Mr. Planner.
Okay, there are kind of like two items under the same heading. The first item, I just want to talk briefly about the site walk that the committee conducted at the last, on May 24th. The site walk was conducted on May 24th. Site walk participants walked from the CT Fast Track parking lot up the east side of Willard Avenue to Spring Street and then to the end of Spring Street. Participants continued walking along Willard to Shepherd Drive and to the end of Shepherd Drive. Several residents were present for much of the walk. It was good. There was a good. I thought there was a good turnout of citizens, enough for the commissioners to hear several concerns that people in that neighborhood will have. I think it was educational for the commissioners to actually walk the street and see for themselves what the houses and the businesses there look like. So I think it was a good experience. And then the next item to report is the grant that TPZ has proposed to hire a consultant to help write TOD regulations for Newington Junction and to help explain to the residents and to the town in general about TOD and mixed use. Was approved by the council last night, so the grant will be submitted next day or so. And absolutely, because the council asked also, the consultant will be hired by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the consultant will be working for the commission. Definitely be under your supervision.
Yeah, good, that's what we wanted. Commissioner Payne.
Mr. Chairman, I was at the walkthrough and there was a lot of residents that were concerned about their residential houses. And I think this commission should consider not putting the overlay zone over the residential area. We should take a close look at it and keep the overlay zone away from the houses that want to stay there pretty much. Because if you put an overlay zone over the whole area, let's say a few houses decide to sell, then it's kind of like really, you're going to have some residential and then something else. So I think we should designate a residential area and then have the overlay zone as a separate zone.
And actually, you could achieve that very simply by, if you do decide to adopt the overlay zone on just the industrial, if there are a couple of adjacent residential property owners who do want to participate, they could apply for a map amendment, and it would not be spot zoning, because you'd just be extending the existing boundary around it at their request. So that would satisfy everybody, I would think.
Any commissioner comments on that? I'm just trying to think of how you get into the industrial area. What do you do? Go by Spring Street?
Well, that would be the challenge for the person who owns the industrial land to find a way to get to it.
Well, probably closest to the busway, there would be some of the houses right there, maybe you would accept with the industrial area, so there's an entrance in there. And then the remaining houses going down Willard and some of the houses on Spring Street would remain as residential.
But I'm just thinking out loud. If we made the whole thing a overlay zone and people choose not to participate in it, then they keep their houses residential. I don't know what you're accomplishing. The only thing that you're accomplishing is restricting the use, restricting the access to it or the assembling of properties by a developer.
Well, but
Have
then,
to think
the
about that.
owner of the residential property who is contracted to sell it to a developer can apply for a zone change. And at his request, change it from R12 to I, which would then be under the overlay zone. So it would be completely at the request of the, I'll call him the homeowner.
My concern was that if two properties did do it and then three didn't, that it would be all like very mishmashed. And that would be my concern, is protection for the houses that did not want to sell.
Right.
So that was my concern.
Okay.
The other thing that I had a little concern with, the Spring Street is a very narrow road. I think it's probably 18 feet wide, maybe. And that's right up against the people that own the property there. There's maybe about a foot or two that the town still owns, and then that's it. So any access to that back area would have to come off of Shepherd Drive. I would not want to see anything done to Spring Street in any way, shape, or form. Because I want to protect those residents as much as possible up there. Thank you.
Okay.
No action is needed at this time.
Okay. So we just leave it, we're taking it off the agenda.
Actually, I think at this point we can take it off the agenda.
Okay.
And then the next time there's something to be discussed, I'll mention to the chairman and we can put it on the agenda at that point.
Okay. Next item under new business is item C, the Chick-fil-A site. The people from Chick-fil-A asked us if they could come in informally and discuss a problem they're having with the parking. Accommodate them. State your name and address for the record.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Susan Hayes. I'm with Updike, Kelly, and Spellacy, 100 Pearl Street, Hartford, Connecticut. This is Tony Donato, and he's with Bowler Engineering, and I don't have his address memorized, so he'll have to give you what his address. They're out of Massachusetts. And we want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to come here informally before the commission and talk with you. And I know it's getting late, so we'll be brief and just sort of focus on the issues or questions that we have. We have met several times with both your town planner and your economic development consultant to talk about the project, and we've done a lot of historic research. And as we've gone through the whole process, there are all sorts of questions that have come up that, we've asked Craig. He wasn't around when it was approved. I was around, but I didn't work on this project. And as we were designing and developing what we wanted to do there, we basically just had questions that we didn't know the answer to. We thought maybe that somebody here might have been on the commission when the original development at the site was approved. And so we had some specific questions, and then we have come up against an issue just from a real estate perspective, which is creating some additional issues for us, and we've got some resolutions that we want to discuss with the commission with respect to that. So primarily, what we're looking at is putting the Chick-fil-A in where the Ruby Tuesdays is at the Lowe's Plaza. And this was developed in the 90s, in the early 90s, I believe, is when it was developed. And at that point in time, what they did was they came in with an overall site plan for the entire site. And they approved it as one development, even though it was different lots owned by different people. So that things such as the setback requirements, the open space, all of that stuff applied to the development as a whole as opposed to the individual parcels. And, you know, we're coming in with one of the individual parcels and are redeveloping that. And that sort of created some questions about, you know, is there sufficient parking? Are we parking ourselves? What about the interior landscaping, open space, all of that type of stuff? The other issue that we've come up against is that there's an REA on the property. And one of the requirements in the REA is that you cannot decrease the number of parking spaces on any individual parcel without the consent of all the other owners of the property that is the subject to the REA. We don't need the number of parking spaces that are currently on the site, but we have not been able to get the approval of all of the owners within the shopping center to agree to that. So we're left with the situation of having to keep more parking spaces than A, we want, and B, we need by zoning. And then because of that, that sort of the increase in the number of parking spaces increases the requirement as it relates to the interior landscaping. And we can't fit them both in together. So one of the first items that we have, and I don't know if you do have the smaller plans there in front of you, and Tony, if you want to maybe point out one of the items that we were thinking of doing, since we exceed the zoning requirements by a goodly number of parking spaces. What's out there today is 66 parking spaces. What we were proposing was 54 parking spaces. What is required is, correct me if I'm wrong, is 49 parking spaces. So we are we're 17 spaces over parked for the site, but that's what we have to do according to the REA. What we were proposing to do was to basically have 9 of the spaces be done with landscape pavers. I'm not sure of the exact terminology. There was some confusion with the terminology we used with what Craig was thinking, but when Craig sent us today a cut sheet of what he wanted us to do, we said, oh yeah, that's what we're going to do. So it would basically be the you want to pass it down? Pavers that have the grass that grows up through them. They've used them at West Farms, they've used them. I actually worked on the Costco up in Enfield, and the whole perimeter, all the perimeter parking is, like when you look at the aerials, other than, you know, some of it, depending on, because of the drought, some of it's a little dry, you really can't tell that those are parking areas.
Can I ask a question before you proceed? Why did you pick those specific parking spaces? Just curious, because those would be, it looks like to me, those would be the ones that would be most used. I would have picked the ones further away. I'm just...
Good question, Mr. Chair. Chick-fil-A would prefer those spaces be just to keep it away from the truck traffic. The vehicles maneuvering over them, such as the trash truck or any delivery truck that would come around in front of the restaurant, just to minimize any wear and tear on that area.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, because we have to have, you know, we have more parking spaces, in order for us to meet the interior landscaping requirement, we need more landscaping. So the question is, we actually exceed the requirement, but one of the other requirements in the REA is that we're supposed to keep the same amount of open space. So we're over your 15% when you include the pavers, but before we got too far down the road, we wanted to get some feedback from the commission as to whether or not they would accept what you have in front of you as counting towards interior landscaping. And then also, quite frankly, the open space, because there's a 10% open space for the entire parcel. And then the other thing is that because this was developed a while ago, your regulations have changed. So there are certain things out there that just don't meet what the current requirements are. We're not necessarily changing them, but we wanted to just double check with the commission that they were okay, that these are existing conditions that will remain. And that those are, if you want to just run through those, Tony?
The existing conditions?
Yeah, the existing conditions that maybe don't comply with the current regulations, that we're just going to keep the same.
Oh, okay. We had talked to Craig about this too, is that the existing sidewalk, it was located within the 35-foot front setback. That's an existing condition. There's a connection that connects the existing Ruby Tuesday to the Outback restaurant, and that is located within the 35-foot landscape setback. And also, those spaces along those spots are only 16 feet depth. There's a provision in the bylaws that allow a 2-foot overhang over an unobstructed path, but it does currently overhang over that same sidewalk.
So we won't be changing the existing condition, but again, it's not in compliance with current zoning requirements. I mean, it would be a legal nonconformity, I guess, is what you would consider it.
Is it set back there?
No, no, that's not an issue. Was there anything else?
LID? You want to talk about? You're probably going to have a very hard time complying with our current LID requirements. So did you want to maybe touch on that?
Well, we were proposing a small, originally our development had proposed a little mini bar retention area in the center island, which we can no longer provide in that area. But in addition to that area, we are also providing a small mini bar retention area at the southwest corner of the site. There's a little triangle there on the corner. That would be the LID area of the site.
Well, couldn't you, where they're putting a grass stone, that would be considered part of the LID?
It wouldn't, yes, it definitely counts towards LID, but remember, the rule is to the maximum extent practicable. So that's great, but they need to give us more and more until there's no more practicable, and that point we'd stop.
This is a tough site because it's a lot of existing conditions here.
Sure.
So, this is one of those sites that, you might not be able to get all the LID that you would normally get for a brand-new site, brand-new construction.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, I thought our conversations with the city engineer was that for the increase of, I think originally we had a slight increase with the drive-through area, so we were providing the equivalent for that area with the mini bar retention area. Or we could do the recharge too.
And that's good, but the goal is always the maximum that you can provide within reason, right? And that's the standard, the maximum to the maximum extent practicable.
Anthony?
I have a question for our planner. On the top, where I'm assuming the black line, the dark black line is the border within the overall plan.
It's the property line.
Property line for the overall plan. So with what Commissioner Payne had said, it's a tough site. What is that little rounded kidney section that?
Someone else's land.
Okay, but is it the portion, I'm just trying to, you're in a.
There's a lot of cross easements on this property, multiple cross easements. And
But do they all, let me ask you, do they all drain with the LID, do they all drain to that detention pond that's in that back corner?
Yes.
So you're like putting a peg in a circle into the square, and it fits one way but not another. I guess what I'm saying is, right there, the grass that's in that, kidney shaped it. Oh, I know the site. I know the site very well.
Right, so.
What I'm saying is, all four of those, IHOP, Ruby Tuesday, the Outback,
Azteca,
Azteca, they all even though they're all separate properties, they already have the easements to drain their LIDs into the detention pond.
Well, it's not their LIDs. None of them have LID. They have existing drainage.
Existing drainage.
And the existing drainage network is what it is. Okay, so your question is, or your comment is
No, I guess
what?
my question is, you have all these and now you're trying to say, we need more grass. And that's what I'm getting at, is here's someone who's trying to redevelop, there's no way to.
Well, there is a way. There's always a way. But the amount that they have to provide is whatever they can. They don't. The regulation says that they only have to provide LID. Well, there's a mathematical amount of LID of recharge and treatment that they need to provide, or that they need to achieve, and they need to show how they intend to achieve that goal on their site. And if they just flat out can't achieve that goal, then we stop at that point. We only make them achieve as much as they can within reason. Yeah.
So that's one of the few spots that has grass on it in the overall
You're talking about that area up at the top?
No, I'm talking about the whole in general.
Oh, well, but that area on top is not on their property, so they wouldn't get credit for it anyway.
I think with the corner piece, that the triangular piece on the corner of the entrance in the Berlin Turnpike in the grass stone areas, I think that's as much as we're gonna get. And I
Correct.
wouldn't force them into providing any more than what they're showing here. I mean, because this would be the only piece on that whole 25-acre site or whatever the number of acres there are there, that would be trying to meet an LID when they already have existing drainage that drains into a system. It doesn't make any sense. So we'll try to get as much as we can. I think this is as much as we're going to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to get that out there for discussion. Yep.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
This picture here is representative of the 9 green spaces. I can't read it, but what, is that sidewalk around those, or is that grass around where you have green, that little triangle in the center?
Oh, this would be landscaping.
So that's also, so you'd have the green parking spaces, and then the areas that are white in that triangle, what is that? Grass?
We could.
Grass, is it permeable pavers, is it?
It would be grass.
Okay.
We could look at perhaps draining, pitching some of the stormwater into this area, and maybe, originally it was supposed to be a mini bioretention area, and we could still try to incorporate that into the site.
But it's not a concrete walkway?
No.
Okay, that's right,
No, it would be grass, it would be landscaped, it would be, I don't know if we've gotten that far in the
Just so that,
landscaping plans. but-
I look at anything white on here without an arrow saying landscape is pavement or some form of concrete.
I should have highlighted.
No, that's okay, I understand, on the loop behind the proposed location is drive-through concrete.
So this building is the existing building under demolition. This is a brand-new building.
Correct.
Okay, just for the record. And just another quick question. I don't want to have a full hearing on this, but you looked at the queuing for, I know that Chick-fil-A's is notorious for having long lines in the.
Very fast.
Yes, Chick-fil-A has their own internal standards with regards to queuing, and they do incorporate the double drive-through lane, and they've kind of pioneered that kind of system, so there'd be adequate queue for this location.
Okay.
Yeah, on the 9 spaces there, it looks like there's, in that triangle, it looks like you have one parking space that's still just a regular parking space there next to the 2. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense to make that green too, or not? I don't know if that's too much work, but I just wondering if, looks-wise, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Whether or not it should be one extra space, so now that whole thing is green there.
You know what he's talking about?
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a thought that had come to me also.
I think this is, I think that, I don't have any problem with those spaces becoming green space. That's what they are.
Yeah.
And it helps with the LID.
Yeah, when we do that, we exceed what the requirements are at the zoning. And the interesting thing, which I wasn't aware of this, when we do the open space, we don't get to count the 35-foot frontage. So we're actually, the green space is actually well in excess of what it is that, you know, we will ultimately, our calculations will ultimately show what it is. Everything's sort of floating because we're moving stuff, and I wouldn't even say, I don't know if the numbers are on what you guys have. It doesn't look at, we're still, you know, adding spaces, moving space, you know, doing all that sort of stuff. So the numbers are in a total flux, but we will, at this point in time, our goal is to make sure that, you know, our interior landscaping and our open space meet what they were, which would be an exceedance of what the town's criteria are.
So the way, if I understand this correctly, that you're deficient by the rules of let's call it the condo association or whatever. Their rules, you were deficient by 2 parking places? How many were you?
No, we would, if we were to do what we had wanted to do, we would be under by 12 parking spaces.
12 parking places.
From a town's perspective, the town's regulatory perspective, we are 17 spaces, my math may be a little off, I'm a lawyer, not an engineer, but I think we're 17 spaces more than what you guys would require.
From our perspective, you have plenty of parking.
Yeah, we have plenty. And what we're showing now will in fact meet the REA.
Okay, the REA.
Yeah, it will meet the REA, but in order for us to meet the landscaping requirements and the open space requirements, that's why we have to have some of them be green. So we'll have compliant number of parking spaces, true pavement parking spaces to meet the zoning regulations plus some. And then we'll have the grass ones that will get us up to the REA number.
So that REA agreement applies to the other tenants also, right?
Correct.
It would apply to Lowe's?
Correct.
And for the number of parking places that they have to have, should be all functional parking places per the REA, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You know that they use 25 or more as displays?
Yes.
Which we're gonna look into from an enforcement perspective.
Yeah.
But that doesn't, you know, if you're looking for you to provide the right amount, then they should be providing the same per the agreement, which has nothing to do with us. But
right.
From a zoning perspective, they're using parking places for display of merchandise.
Yep.
Just a point of information.
Thank you. We'll make note of that. So I don't know if there's anything else you would like us to explain, if there's anything when just quick looking at it that you say, oh my goodness, you know, why are you doing this? Or, you know, if there's anything else that jumps out at you and.
I will ask the planner a question. As far as the existing conditions, how do we handle that as they're gonna, they don't meet, they're bringing something in that will not meet today's standards, so today's regulations.
Well,
right. Yeah, so
yes.
how do we get around that?
Well,
How do
okay,
we work on that?
one by one. Okay, Attorney Hayes mentioned that the
It's a sidewalk.
She mentioned that these parking spaces are 16 feet long. Yep. Okay, the rule is you can have a 16-foot long parking space, but there needs to be a tire stop or something to prevent it from overhanging. And there never was any tire stop to prevent them from overhanging. So these it's not so much they're not conforming so much as they probably shouldn't have been approved in the first place, but for whatever reason they were. And so Chick-fil-A is asking that they be allowed to keep the parking spaces, the design of them in a manner that maybe shouldn't have been approved, but was. It is what it is. They just want to make for the record that they'll be allowed to keep what they have. Right. So you don't need to take any action on that. Okay. They just wanted to hear from the commission that you're not going to give them a hard time when they show them with the site plan.
Have you ever
showing those
seen
16
anyone
foot.
walk on that?
What's that?
Have you ever seen anyone walk on that?
on that
lived here
sidewalk.
I used to live at
Yeah.
Richard Street. I never seen one person walk on that.
I don't know what the purpose of that sidewalk is, to be perfectly honest with you, interconnection with, Outback, if you don't like the food at the one place, you could walk to the other. I don't, it doesn't make any sense. I've never seen anyone walk there either. And the cars do, even at the Outback, the cars do overhang the, onto the sidewalk,
They do.
so.
So you're
The only question, and we're just sort of mumbling to ourselves, is whether or not we're required to have, like, since the sidewalk's there, whether it's required to stay for ADA. And neither of us know the answer to that. I mean, we'll certainly look into that, and, because that was our thought of why it had to be there. Or why it was there. I mean.
Maybe. Yeah.
Better read the agreement with the other.
No, I mean, believe me, that's the first thing. Anytime somebody wants to do something with the plan, we pull the agreement out and make sure we're not gonna be violating something.
Okay, I think we covered everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so
wonderful.
I prepared that draft motion just so that for the record, there's a record that the commission did agree that, that grass permeable pavers can count towards a developer's required amount of green space for future developers. So that's why I prepared that draft motion for the commission's use
Okay,
when you sat down.
yeah.
So
on
this
that
would be,
stack.
let me ask you a question. So if we make this here, this would apply, if we vote on this here, this would apply uniformly to the whole community.
Yes, exactly. Right, and, yeah, exactly, and if you're having pause, then maybe you shouldn't allow Chick-fil-A. If it's not good for everyone, it shouldn't be good for just Chick-fil-A. And I have no problem recommending you approve it, because I think it meets the intent of the regulation.
Well, that's what I want to.
And an argument could be made that it also meets the letter, but an argument could also be made that it doesn't. This way, you're on record as saying for the rest of time, or until the rules get changed, yes, if an applicant wants to show some of his or her parking spaces as grass permeable, they can do that, and it can count towards their amount of mandatory green space.
That would be for, I'm just gonna use an idea of Lowry Place, that whole parking lot inside all the buildings, the public municipal lot. Just hear me out on this.
Yeah.
The street parking, say a business moves in to where Roosters is, do they count the street parking?
They have
Well,
special requirements.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
kind
no,
of,
Well, I'm
I
just-
see your point, but maybe a better example would be somewhere not in town center, because that's,
Well, with that, but this, what I'm at with this,
it doesn't apply.
you're doing
No,
this.
Your point is well taken, but you're using a bad
okay,
example.
give me
Let's find a
another
better
example, give me a better example.
Any private property or anywhere, anywhere,
You're increasing LID and you're making green space and parking spaces as a combination.
Okay, no, I'm just,
So I don't see there's.
I just
any-
don't, I'm thinking
I
of
don't see
other
there's any downfall
places.
at all.
Again, this is the
That's a good
Berlin
question.
Turnpike we're talking about.
Right.
Because everyone has issues with wanting to split the pike from everybody else in town.
Actually,
I
this
just-
could be very helpful for some of the older developments
Okay,
to try to comply with LID, that this is a nice alternative, so.
I'd like to hear that. I mean, I heard all what they have to say. I wanna hear more what you, is
When
it
the experts came in from wherever, Boston, to promote that LID, one of the things that part of their presentation was to cut down on the parking and put grass stone in.
Okay.
Or this type of a paver, so that you get the LID, you get the parking, you get the whole thing.
I just don't, I guess I don't wanna,
I would encourage some of the big shopping centers to put more of this in. A good example would be Walmart parking
Yeah,
area.
okay.
It's a sea of asphalt.
I just wanna make sure it's not gonna,
And there could be areas there where there's very little use of some of them parking places,
okay.
particularly at the north end of the, if they were grass stone, that it would look more, we would get more green space or more green look than what we got now.
And
That was-
also, on some of the larger parking lots, if it's put in the proper areas, it can filter out contaminants from the watershed, from the parking area, so, because it'll come into that area and then it'll filter down, and so, it could be beneficial there for environmental reasons.
My hesitation was for this discussion. Not for against it, I just
We're
want to
gonna
hear other
take
side of it.
this draft,
Good idea.
this
Good point.
motion, we could act on this motion.
Yes,
right?
I think you should.
Okay, so we're gonna move that to old business as item, B, C, D, E. Item E. Okay, that,
Thank you very
Oh,
much
mine?
for your time, and hopefully we will be in with an application in the not too distant, thank you, not too distant future.
okay.
Thank you.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is, where are we? Old business. You want to read petition 1617?
Petition 1617, TPD approval, section 3.23.1, accessory outside use to display exterior furniture at 56 Costello Road, Ashley Furniture, Sammy and Lucia, applicant, ZYNN LLC, owners Amy and Brugia, 56 Costello Road, Newington, Connecticut, contact.
The applicant called me yesterday and said that he had a meeting with his other stores in New Haven tonight, and would it be necessary for him to be here? I told him it would be good if you could, but if you have an important meeting with all of your stores, do what you need to do for business, and I'll tell him what happens tomorrow morning.
Okay. There's a motion that you want to read, please.
This one? You want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead. You read it.
Petition 16-17 TPZ approval section 3.23.1 accessory outside use 56 Costello Road, Sammy Abanzara, 56 Costello Road, Newington, Connecticut, contact. I move to approve petition 16-17 TPZ approval section 3.23.1 accessory outside use to display exterior furniture at 56 Costello Road, Ashley Furniture, Sammy Abanzara, applicant, Zinn LLC, owner, Sammy Abanzara, 56 Costello Road, Newington, Connecticut, contacts. Conditions, none.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Any questions, Bob?
Just for the record, I was not here during this discussion. Evidently, it was the last meeting, so I am going to abstain from this vote.
Okay, if you read the minutes and stuff, you could vote on it, but if you feel
I
comfortable.
have no problem with it, but I just wasn't here for the discussion, so.
No problem. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people voting. So any other discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? When the applicant calls for tomorrow to find out whether we approved it or not, would you tell him, remind him of our sign regulation and the moratorium that is ongoing? And if he's unfamiliar with the law, would you send him something that explains that we don't allow temporary signs all the way up and down the Berlin Turnpike?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, the next item under old business is St. Mary's School. Do we have a motion?
No.
No?
I wasn't expecting
Okay,
it.
can you do a motion? Pretty much just read the thing and
I'd like to make
approve
a
it.
motion to approve petition 1917, special permit, section 3.2.5, school to conduct a day programming for adults with intellectual disabilities at 652 Willard Avenue, St. Mary's School, Catholic Charities, Archdiocese of Hartford, applicant St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church Corporation, owner Cynthia McKenna, Catholic Charities, 839, 841 Asylum Avenue, Hartford, Connecticut. Contact. The commission finds that that this is complies with everything. Complies with existing conditions.
Second.
Motion made and second. For the record, I'd like to add that this is something that I believe that the community could use. It's a good application for an existing school. So just part of the record. Any questions?
I'd like to also second your comments, Commissioner Aida. Also, I believe this is definitely a need in this town for this. Thank you.
Any questions on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we can call them tomorrow, or when they call, just tell them it was approved with no conditions. Next item, item D, the fireworks display at, sale of fireworks at Olympia Diner. Is there a motion on that one?
A draft motion?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, Dominic Reed, make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve petition 23-17, TPZ approval section 3.23.1, accessory outside use to sell fireworks at 3413 Berlin Turnpike, Olympia Diner, Keystone Fireworks, applicant 3413 Berlin Turnpike, LLC, owner Chris Costello, Keyworks Fireworks, 201 Seymour Street, Lancaster, PA, Connecticut. Contact. Findings that this will not interfere with the existing parking, and they will only be putting signs up on the tent only.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any comments, any additions? Okay. We will be monitoring this this application just to make sure that if they come in next year, that there was no problem with the parking. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
And then the Chick-fil-A?
Item E under old business is the draft, section 610-1.
Section 610-1, minimum landscape area. I move that permeable grass pavers shall count towards the minimum landscape area required under section 6.10.1 of the zoning regulations.
Motion made and second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Very good. That ends the motions, I believe. There's nothing else. You didn't miss anything?
No.
Okay. Petitions for public hearing. Want to read that, Dominic?
Petitions for public hearings, petition 21-17, special permit, section 3.2.4, senior assisted living at 751 Russell Road, HDC 1, LLC, owner applicant John Goskalski, CME Associates Incorporated, 33 Wilbur Crossway, Mansfield, Connecticut. Contact.
Mr. Planner.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the application, the letter, and my comments were inadvertently left out of the agenda packet. I didn't realize it until today, which is why I made copies for all the commissioners on the table. It's the old Amara site. It's come back. It's two separate buildings, both 5 stories high, one independent living, one assisted living. And the plans are being reviewed by the staff. Now, as everybody knows, the former town engineer has moved on. The town has not hired a replacement yet, but we are using a local engineering consulting firm to do on-call plan review. The on-call engineer has started to review the plans, sent some initial comments to the applicant's engineers with some pretty basic things that need to be addressed right away. The applicants are in the process of revising the plans. We haven't received the revised plans yet, so I'm just, so we have not finished reviewing the plans. I don't have a problem with suggesting the commission schedule the hearing for 2 weeks from now. Number one, because I'm confident the plans will be done by then and reviewed by staff. But even if they aren't, the issue is LID, and that's an issue that will work itself out. I don't think that should hold up having a public hearing on the overall project itself. I think there are a lot of aspects of this project that deserve a public hearing, and I don't think we should wait until they've revised the LID plans to begin the public hearing. So, although Mr. Claffey may not agree, I think we should proceed with the public hearing.
Well, that's a site that's going to be challenging for LID with consideration that it's on a ledge. Where are you going to drain to? Drain into Cedar Street?
Well, actually, they do have some opportunities that they overlooked, which were brought to their attention, things that wouldn't be that difficult, and that's what they're working on. Okay. So again, it's always, the standard is always the maximum extent practicable. We don't make anyone do more than they can, but we make them do as much as they can, and that's what they've been directed to do.
I think this is going to take a process for this application, so I think we should start it and work our way through it.
Right.
So put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Yep.
Any objections from the commissioners? Okay, good. Next item, town planners report.
Okay, the first item on my report was Chick-fil-A, but we discussed that. They've come in and presented their issues to you and got good guidance from the commission on that. The second item in my report, I proposed a temporary sign regulation. And I know the commission wants to discuss that, so let's come back to that. And let me just dispense with the third item on my report, which is the Cedar Mountain Stone and Mulch issue in Weathersfield. Mm-hmm. It's still ongoing. The applicants, they tabled their request back in April, I believe it was, yes, and they still haven't come back yet. And I spoke to the planner in Weathersfield the other day, and Weathersfield is running out of patience with these folks. And if they don't come back with the revised plans pretty soon, Weathersfield will take enforcement action against them. Okay, so temporary sign regulations. The staff took a stab at what we understood the business community to want to see in the new temporary sign regulations. We certainly knew what the commission wanted to see in the new sign regulations. We came up with what we thought was a reasonable compromise. Not everybody's going to like it. What the staff proposes is that temporary signs no longer be allowed on the Berlin Turnpike, and that's going to be controversial. But as the chairman said, this is all about protecting Newington's brand. There's a reason that the Turnpike is as successful an area as it has been, and that is because of the appearance, because of the aesthetics. And temporary signs can detract from the aesthetics of that area. There's some talk about is it fair to have different rules in one area of town than another? Well, that's the whole point of zoning. That's exactly the point of zoning. There are areas of town, neighborhoods, if you will, that have a particular culture or character that the regulations should enhance and promote. We have residential zones where we don't want to have commercial signage. That's fine. That's perfectly legal. Free speech rights do make it tricky if you want to allow signage in the residential zone, but luckily we're not talking about that tonight. Let me go back. We're just talking about temporary signs, basically in commercial zones, and as the regulation, as I proposed, does not allow temporary signs on the Berlin Turnpike. So it's less than a page. Does the commission want to go through it right now? Well, there's some new things in here. The things that have never been in a presentation before. The idea of having the. You read these? I did not have time to read that. Okay, well, it's only 6 or 7 paragraphs.
Because this is not the regulation, just so make it clear to you. This is a starting point for a sign regulation.
Let me just clarify. This was written up and thought of and designed through you and only the municipal employees,
Cor-
not from the outside.
No,
C or
no,
anything.
no, no. This was very much informed by what the business community submitted, but we didn't actually sit down with the community, with the chamber and go through it point by point. But I had the chamber's comments in mind when I put it together.
I just
Right.
want to make sure that's on the record.
Yep. Okay, paragraph A, permits for temporary ground signs and other temporary signage in any commercial zone, except as prohibited in section 622B, may be approved by the TPZ for a 4-month period and may be renewed for 1 or more additional 4-month periods. So that right there is a big improvement from the business community's point of view, because 4 months of signage is a lot more than they currently have under the rules that are now stayed because of the moratorium.
You understand that they're talking about, if you came in and got a permit for an A-frame sign, you got it for 4 months, you could put that sign out every day for 4 months. You understand that?
And then after the 4 months are up, you can come in for a renewal, and unless there was a problem during the first 4 months, you'd get the renewal fairly simply, probably by staff, but we can talk about that later. Paragraph B, though, does say that temporary ground signs are not permitted on the Berlin Turnpike. Item C, in the town center zone and in the B business zones, temporary ground signs may be permitted on the sidewalk in front of the business where the Planning and Zoning Commission finds that such signs will not create excessive clutter nor impede pedestrians. So you will have total control over how many A-frame signs you allow on, let's say, Market Square. You can allow 1, 2, or none, because the burden would be on the applicant to persuade you that his sign will not create excessive clutter or impede pedestrians. Paragraph D, temporary signs shall be A-frame or tent style only. H or I-frame signs and wind waiver signs are prohibited. Temporary ground sign material may be wood, metal, or plastic. Temporary ground signs shall be not more than 12 square feet of message area, in other words, 2 foot by 3 feet times 2 sides, and shall be not more than 5 feet in total height. And we base those numbers on what's out there, what's generally available to people to buy as A-frame signs. The sign needs to be not more than 5 feet from the main entrance to the business. I think 5 feet might be a little too tight. I think maybe 10 feet would be fine, but that certainly can be tweaked. And shall not impede pedestrian traffic. Now remember, this is not on the Berlin Turnpike, so none of this would work on the Berlin Turnpike.
It wouldn't work in the center of Newington.
It'd be in the
Main
park.
Street.
Wouldn't work.
Say no. Then just deny it if a case comes in where it doesn't work, then just say no.
There's some
Because you
areas
can
in
always
that that
control,
can't even put it
because
within
you can,
5 feet.
because you have to first be satisfied that it won't impede traffic, pedestrian traffic, or clutter. And what you just described would be clutter, would impede pedestrian traffic, so just deny it.
Leave it at 5.
Then you're,
What?
you put it at 5 feet. Oh, I'm not gonna stop.
Well, all right, let me finish, and we can come back and talk about all these. Okay, so 5 feet. Temporary ground signs shall be displayed during normal business hours only, and shall not be in the right-of-way, except basically in the town center zone, where they could be on the sidewalk, because that's what the town center zone is. It's all about, like the Rooster Restaurant, they're right on the sidewalk. And you've all been to cities, you've all walked, West Hartford and New York. There are lots of A-frame signs on the sidewalks, but there are not so many of them that they become a problem. And neither would they in Newington. If you adopted this regulation, you would not approve so many that they became a clutter or a problem for pedestrians. And then the last two are next one is the same. Temporary ground signs should not be lighted, flashing, digital, or rotating. And this last paragraph talks about cold air inflatables and banners, which are currently allowed under the regulation. Not too many people take advantage of the cold air inflatables, but it's on the books now, and so the staff's not proposing to take it away. And banners. We've always allowed banners. Some merchants use them more than others. And banners shall be no larger than 60 square feet, and they must be attached to the building. And that's key for banners.
And they
Okay.
would still have to come in for a special permit.
For a permit.
For the banners
For
also.
a permit, yes.
Just a second now. Are we gonna allow them the banner for a 4-month period?
Well, that's what I'm suggesting. If you think 4 months is too long for a banner, we could make that less.
So you could have a temporary sign up for 365 days.
Yeah.
If the commission gives them 3 renewals in a row.
Exactly what one of the proponents asked when they sat at that end of the table and said, we want a 365.
But only if you say yes
But
the first time, and only if you,
these
well, and we'll get to the renewal process later on, but theoretically, yes, but only if you want to allow it.
But once you give a permit for someone for an
4
A-frame sign, and they get their, how many days, 40 days or?
4 months.
4 months.
4 months.
120.
They get their first 4 months, and they come into the town. We're not gonna have them come to us all the time for the second. They're gonna come to the staff, and the staff's gonna bring it to us and say, hey, listen, Joe's permit is up next month. You want him to come back to the commission, or can we allow him to go ahead? We had no problems, no complaints, no nothing. And probably this commission would say, oh yeah, let him have another 4 months. So yes, it could be where someone could have a temporary sign forever.
No, I agree. I mean, the downtown area is where you're gonna have a problem with your 5 foot. Because you're gonna have businesses fighting over that space out in front, because some business you walk out, you got that wall for the flagstone walls, and other businesses you don't. So if you look at Roosters, you put one out there, you're blocking that walkway either way. His whole frontage of the building.
Then it would be denied. You would say no.
But that's what I'm getting at is, I think it has to be retweaked for a proponent, because you'd be, based on the way a public way is built, you're denying them the same right as the guy next door who has open footage in front of them.
Sure, because his circumstances are different. There's no problem with that.
You're gonna have to put a clause in there, that's town of Newington land?
Yes.
Okay, and you're gonna need a insurance waiver from these, businesses.
Insurance
Whole-
certificate of
whole
making
the
it the
town
town of Newington an additional insured.
As far as the, banners, you called for 60 square feet maximum on the banners, and I guess you're using a reference that we, of something that was in the regulations?
Well, we started with Stu Leonard, which is much bigger than 60. And that's why,
That's my point. How are you going to now tell us?
and that's what I'm trying to answer. We started from that point, but then when we realized that what Stu Leonard's has is much more than we would want to allow everyone else by right, the CEO and I ratcheted down to something that seemed more reasonable to be mounted to a building that future businesses would be allowed. Stu Leonard's is probably, they could probably make an argument that they're grandfathered. They were given a permit by Art Hankey years ago for the size of banner they have. I'm not going to fight Stu Leonard's for the one banner, because they're the only one in town that have that huge banner. No one else has one that big.
That doesn't make sense.
What?
You're gonna grandfather them in. Now, wait a minute.
Okay, we don't grandfather. People already are grandfathered by law. It's a law. Once you've been approved, unless.
They didn't get permanent approval.
Yeah,
What
they
I'm
did.
saying is,
No, they don't have
they
permanent
don't have
approval.
permanent approval.
They never
okay?
got approval.
Okay.
Yeah,
They don't
they
have,
did.
they have a they came in and pulled the permit for that?
From the former CEO, yes.
What I suggest is that if you have it based on the size of the building, so somebody like Stu Leonard's, who has a huge building, maybe 150 square feet for that 25 days is appropriate. But somebody that has a small 3,000 square foot space, you wouldn't put that big of a space. So you gauge it on how many frontage of building that
Is
they
that
have.
not
Okay.
like we base the sign ordinance
Yeah.
now on Berlin Turnpike?
Okay,
based
that's a
on
good idea.
frontage? So your businesses downtown, maybe Lowry Place or Best Market would be different than,
Big- compared to big
Starbucks or
box store.
Fen Road area where they're little shops.
Good idea.
Boom, boom, boom,
Yeah,
boom, boom.
okay.
And the banners shouldn't be allowed 365 days. I object to that.
Yep.
The banners right now that we have in our regulations are up to 25 days. And from the Economic Development Commission's study, they suggested that if they could just double that to 50 days throughout the year. that would satisfy most of the businesses.
50 days throughout across the year?
Your choice.
Well, across a 12-month,
No
okay.
more than 25 at a time.
Mhm. Okay.
I think we should all take this proposed thing and think about it and come up with, if there's any other items you want to add, or define some of these issues in these 10 different items.
Just for the, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to.
No, go
Just
ahead.
for the record, I still feel that it wouldn't be fair to the Berlin Turnpike. I'm not in favor of denying them A-frame signs. If they want an A-frame sign within 5 feet of their door, and if they're gonna comply to that, and they think that it's going to help them, I don't have a problem with that. I also think that these A-frame signs, there should be a large enough permit fee so that they really have to think about whether or not it's gonna be helpful for them or not. There was one town that made the permit fee $500 for a year. And they had to bring that sign in every night. And if they left it out, then it's a violation. And the $500, when you think about it, for an entire year, is really a small amount of money for advertising if you feel that it really helps you, okay, for 365 days. But it's also, $500 is also a good sum where the average business, if it's really not gonna help them, they're not gonna spend it. So, just a suggestion.
I don't know, I hear what you're saying about the Berlin Turnpike, but I don't, it doesn't make any sense to have them in these shopping centers that are 100 feet set back from the road.
Well,
You're gonna allow them to have an A-frame sign?
So people are in the plaza and they're walking around, and as they're walking down the sidewalks, there might be an A-frame within 5 feet of their doorway of a restaurant that's in that plaza, and they may see the special there. So as the pedestrians are walking in the plaza, that's what it's for. But, you know, and everybody's still gotta comply with it, with everything. They can't just take these A-frames and put them by the curb. And if they do that on the Berlin Turnpike, or if they do that anywhere else, then that's a violation.
I don't know what the problem is of separating the Berlin Turnpike. I mean, we're giving them double the signage on their buildings. The traffic's going by at 60 miles an hour or faster. It's a blight. It's a blight. That's what it's gonna be.
The A-frames are not for traffic going up and down, but they're basically for foot traffic for people to see. For instance, Mortensen's use it. He has it out every day. He brings it in. But so when people walk out of Moe's, they look over this way and they can't really see the sign on his building, but then they see maybe an ice cream special on his sign. And that's within 5 feet of his door. Now, it's out there now. There's also several other A-frame signs out there that we haven't stopped. And once again, the biggest concern I have is zoning enforcement. We're not enforcing these regulations. We could ban all these signs, we'd still have a enforcement problem because our enforcement officer is not going out in a consistent manner, driving around the town maybe twice a week and enforcing the regulations. Most of his enforcement is happening because of complaints or if he was driving somewhere, but it's not done in a consistent manner. I think we have a serious problem with our enforcement, and whether we have sign regulations or we don't have sign regulations, we have to correct the enforcement. And he has to do this enforcement in a consistent manner throughout the entire town.
He brings up, that's a good point. I mean, we could have all the regulations in the world. Right now, we have a moratorium. There should not be one temporary sign in the town of Newington. And you drive around, you find not just one or two, you find several of them, even on the Berlin Turnpike.
And I know he does confiscate them when he sees them, but he can't get every one of them, but he does pluck them when he sees them.
I think with the ticket system, it'll be easier for him. It'll save him a lot of time. But he still is gonna have to say, okay, on, this week I'm gonna go out Tuesday and then I'm gonna go out Thursday and check the entire area. Or I'm gonna check on Tuesday, I'm gonna check these following streets. On Wednesday, I'm gonna check these. He's gotta dedicate some time towards enforcement. And it has to be in a uniform, consistent manner. And then the next problem is, how are we gonna enforce these regulations on the weekends? Because every business knows that he's not around on the weekends, and they're throwing all these signs out every weekend.
Actually, he does come through on weekends a lot, and that is when he does, that's his richest, most target-rich environment is on weekends, because people think that he's not here, but he's here on weekends a lot. He lives in West Hartford, and he's originally from Berlin. He comes through Newington all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's a serious problem, and
Sure.
it has to be addressed.
In his job description, I think that he's got dumped on a bunch of responsibilities that have nothing to do with zoning enforcement officer. So I think a lot of his time is spent in the office doing
Blight.
other work.
Doing blight.
Yeah, blight and all these, I'm sorry. And what other things has he got? He got the blight. That's a full-time position right there.
And now in the summer with tall grass, it's gonna be taking up a lot of his time.
And the ticket system, if the council decides to enact this ticket system for the blight, then while he drives around looking for the sign violations, he can also check for blight. And he can drop off the ticket at the house, or, so, I mean, he'll be able to, if they enact that ticket system for the blight, I think it's gonna help the situation all around for saving him time.
Mm-hmm.
Any commissioner comments? Bobby? I like your suggestion, Bobby, from the beginning. We can eliminate the temporary signs.
We've both
keep
discussed
beating
that for
this
so
horse
long.
to death, and I keep returning to, why are we even doing this?
I do have one question on another matter.
Yes.
And maybe this was covered at the meeting I wasn't here at, but did we ever get any feedback on Cinco de Mayo from Plaza Azteca as far as any issues, any problems? Did we ever get any feedback back on that?
I didn't ask for the police for a report, but I can do that.
If we could, because it was a trial, they're gonna come back again, so it'd be nice, while it's still fresh, to have a report.
Yeah, I can tell you the feedback that I got. The fire marshal was called out. There was a brawl there. The police were called out. Several units of the police had to come. There was fights, and there was overpacked inside of that building. The fire marshal was called out. So
I assure you it won't have a problem there.
yeah.
I thought about that the other day, Mr. Chairman. And so I called the records department, and they got 2 breaches and a trespass. Now, one of those breaches must have been the brawl or something, so on the surface, it looked like, they had a calm day, but evidently they didn't, so I think that leaves us or leaves them in kind of a tenuous position for the next.
Well, I was told by I hate to talk out of school, but I was told by the fire marshal that he didn't think it was such a good idea allowing them to have it again. Okay? I mean, right from the horse's mouth.
For the next time. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I think we should gather the information from police, fire, put it all together, and then this commission should take action and notify them because of the circumstances that happened, that don't bother coming in next year.
I agree 100%, and that's why I asked for a report for a follow-up on this.
Again,
us next
They
year.
do.
So you don't have to send anything, and they don't come, we're wasting our time.
Well, let's at least have the information. I would compile it now while it's fresh and put it in the file. If they do come in next year, we pull the file out and
And
say,
there we go.
listen, you had a brawler, you had this, the fire marshal's not recommending, we got complaints, we're not gonna entertain you doing it again. If it was a better weather that day, the fire marshal told
been
me,
worse.
he said, thank God it rained. He said, because I couldn't believe the bodies in that place when I was called out. Yeah. The number of people. So I think we should document it and see if they come in again. And they better come in, if they're thinking of coming in, they better not wait until the day before the event, because that's not ever gonna happen
We
again.
put it in there, didn't we put something in this year's that said a specific time?
Yes, I think we
said-
did.
We did, we said a
I don't remember,
specific
but-
time, yeah.
Yeah, I think we said,
Yeah, we did.
We did, that was part of
end of February or
Yeah.
something. Okay.
More stuff. You guys are all packing up. We still have communications, we have public participation.
You better speed it up because I haven't had dinner
Yeah, these
yet.
guys everybody wants to go home. You can't go home yet. Communications, CROG, anything?
No.
We're good? Okay.
The only thing
Public-
from about.
Public participation.
Took care of
Is
that.
that communications?
Get your roller skates on,
No, but
Rose.
Commissioner Sobieski does.
You got
Just to let you know, Town of Vernon is looking to put an open space zone in like we are looking at. And CROG is definitely in favor of trying to get as much open space zones in these cities and towns as possible. Thank you.
Rose, what do you got, a computer?
Rose Lyons, 46 Elton Drive. I'm afraid to touch it because it just disappears. I just would like to read from the Economic Development Commission's meeting of June 7th and the Economic Developers Report. TPZ held a walkthrough of the Newington Junction area between Willard Avenue and the Connecticut Fast Track Guideway. Several property owners attended and revealed that they are receiving interest from developers. TPZ is seeking a $45,000 grant to hire a consultant to help write more robust regulations for transit-oriented development at Newington Junction than were necessary for the Cedar Street area. What is not in this report is the comment that was made by the Economic Development Director that he wouldn't be surprised if the residents didn't join in with the property owners across the street, I believe he said at the gas station, and apply to TPZ for a zone change to planned development. I was so interested in his comments that I asked for a map from our GIS department so that I could follow this. So if anybody wants to
$12.
look and see at any time, it'll be available for your use. I did ask for a mile or a half-mile radius. I don't know how I ended up with this big thing, but I did. The town planner provided me with the Responsible Growth Grant application subject area, this map. Much more easier for me to look at, but I'm still confused as to what exactly this consultant, I mean, I know what the consultant's going to do, but I want to know what area he's going to be addressing. And with that, good night.
Well, I'll answer that question for you. I've said at previous meetings that the areas that we're looking at is the triangular piece that runs from Francis Avenue down Willard Avenue to Spring Street or
Well, to the town line.
to the town line. That's covered, that's showing, what is that showing? A half-mile radius from this, from the,
Planner can explain it. It says free. I don't understand.
Well, that's not the area that half-mile radius around the bus station is not inclusive in the area that we're looking at. We're looking at a triangle.
Confirm that, Mr. Minor?
Well, there's two different things going on.
Okay.
The area that we're talking about as far as this grant is concerned is Newington Junction. Don't try to put too fine a line to it. It's Newington Junction. We want to know how people feel who live in Newington Junction about TOD. We want to talk to them about TOD. We want to talk to them about mixed use. The folks who live in that neighborhood. I had to submit a map with a grant application because I couldn't just say the neighborhood. I needed something a little more specific than that. And a half-mile radius is the distance that most people consider to be the furthest distance anybody will walk on a regular basis. So a half-mile radius is the area that's usually agreed to be an area that could be considered a transit-oriented district neighborhood. Now, this wedge that the commission was talking about when there was an actual zone change application active was the area that the commission at that time was thinking about creating the overlay zone for. But this grant that we've applied for is to do an outreach public information program for the whole neighborhood. So that's why there seem to be two different maps. There are two different maps. One was when we had a zone change in mind, and this one is for the purpose of getting money to do a public information program.
So what I'm hearing is that, or what I thought I was hearing was that this consultant was going to be hired to address the transit-oriented development overlay area, but also to do outreach to the people in the area to see what their feelings were. So not only in this circle, this is the circle of who would be affected, but the actual area that you're looking at is just the triangular piece?
I would say forget the wedge for the moment. Forget about that.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. Forget the wedge.
Forget it for the moment. We're stepping back. We're starting from scratch. No preconceived notions. We're going to talk to the neighborhood. We're going to talk to the town at large. If someone shows up at one of our informational sessions who lives on the other side of that circle, we're not going to tell them you can't come in. That circle is just to give a sense of the area of town that we're most concerned about.
But you have no knowledge of any developers going in and any plans to change it to PD?
No, I do, actually.
Changing what?
I do.
What roads? Changing what?
Changing
Yeah, let me speak.
some of the residential area and some of the other areas.
Let me speak to that because I can put that to bed. What Mr. Brecker was talking about is the gas station across the street from the PD, the gas station, I'm sorry?
From the bus area.
Yeah, that little gas station. Yeah, they want to add a drive-through lane to be able to bring in the Dunkin' Donuts. But they're in the B zone, the B business zone. You can't have drive-through in the B zone. So what they might do, because they would like to have a drive-through, they might come before the commission and ask for a zone change to the PD zone where you can have a drive-through. And since it's PD zone across the street, wouldn't be spot zoning. It would be up to the commission whether to approve it or not. But that's what Mr. Brecker was alluding to, was the owner of the gas station's efforts to be able to get a drive-through.
But he actually, I mean, he said they may join in the application.
Well, there is no the application, so I don't know what he meant by the application.
I misunderstood or he misspoke, but,
He might, well, no, I can't, but I can tell you why the owner of the gas station is thinking about asking for a zone change. It's so that he can get a drive-through for a Dunkin' Donuts.
I was more
It's nothing to
concerned
do with
about the
TOD.
residential areas, not so much that side.
I'm not aware of any residential owners who have any plans or interest in changing their zone. It's just the gas
I
station.
walked away from that meeting. Thank you.
I could just tell you this too, Rose, that at this point today, that there is no PD zone in that area. So he can't say, well, we got it across the street. You don't have it across the street. You have residential and you have I zone across the street. Until we make an overlay zone or we make a change in zone.
Okay, and that might be why he's
Correct?
talking. Okay, thank you. And that's why he may be talking to other property owners, so that if 3 or 4 of them want to change to a PD zone, it would be a better planning approach than just one lot. So that's why he may be talking to abutting property owners.
Anyone else from the public wish to speak? Yeah, please come forward, state your name for the record.
Patty Foley, 51 Crown Ridge. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, a lot of you tonight I couldn't hear. And you were sitting with the microphone over here?
I was trying
Or
to speak.
you're sitting it with it a little bit too far. So I'm here just for a letting you know, because in a couple cases, obviously you guys talk about, I don't know, my head's spinning on a few of the issues. I'm going to sleep on it and think about it later, but it's really important that the people at home get to hear you. I know you all kind of know what's going on, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the time that y'all put in, but one of the things is people at home really would like to hear you too. So if you, yeah, I know it's kind of tough sitting here, especially if you're looking at paperwork in front of you, but can you pull that microphone a little bit closer? You can pretty much see that you can hear me in the room. And when I was in the back of the room, I was trying to listen to one of the petitions here. I was having a hard time hearing most of you having the questions because you weren't close enough. These microphones are not trying to pick up your neighbor's conversation, so they need to be a little bit closer. But
Okay. Well, that's good information.
sometimes we need to be just reminded.
We try to do that on a regular basis, talking.
I know
but
you do. You
we
do a
keep
good
slipping
job.
back to talking like everybody knows what we're talking about or can hear us.
Yeah, and somebody can somebody tell me what an LID is? What the heck does that stand for?
It's,
Impact development.
it's drainage.
See, your microphone, we think we have a problem with yours.
You know why? Because this is outdated technology.
No, the light's flashing red on the bottom of the
Aha.
microphone.
Okay, that I couldn't see. Bad battery, probably.
Before I push the button.
Well,
Turn it on now.
I'll just raise my voice a little bit louder. I think I can do that.
But no, I appreciate all that you do, and it's not a criticism, but occasionally we just kind of, the microphone should be about a fist from your face. So when you get ready to, tell us all about your stuff, and then you can push it away. But it's important because you do have a lot of great things, and it's great news. And thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Have a
Thanks
great
for the
evening.
information. We'll try to remember next time.
Either that or I'll stand in the back with a big sign.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I was wondering why you kept putting your head in and scowling.
And here. Thank you. Good night.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Anyone else? Okay. Where are we? Remarks by commissioners. Any remarks? I don't have any closing remarks. Adjournment. Motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, adjourn.
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Hasta la pasta.